Janaranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jairada Madhava Kunja Bihari Jairada Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Rajajanaranjana Yashodanandana Rajajanaranjana Yashodanandana Rajajanaranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jairadha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jairadha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Shri Radha Damodar ki Jai, Radha Govinda ki Jai. All glories to the Sema devotees. Hare Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Naranam Namaskritya Naram Chiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jiyam Udiyat. We're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 5th Canto, Chapter 6, The Activities of Lord Rshabhadeva, Text 14. Aho pi aho nuvamsho yashasavadata praya brato yatra puman purana davatara purushassa adyas chachara dharmam yata karma hetum. Aho, oh, no, indeed, Vamshaha, the dynasty, Yashasa, with widespread fame, Avadhataha, fully pure, Praya Vrataha, related to King Priyavrata, Yatra, wherein, Puman, the Supreme Person, Purana, the original, Krita Avatara, descended as an incarnation, Purusha, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Saha, he, Adhyaha, the original person, Chachara, executed, Dharmam, religious principles, Yat, from which, Akarma Hetum, the cause of the end of the fruitive activities. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Oh, what shall I say of the dynasty of Priyavrata, which is pure and very much celebrated. In that dynasty, the Supreme Person, the original personality of Godhead, descended as an incarnation and executed religious principles that could free one from the results of fruitive activity. Purport. There are many dynasties in human society wherein the Supreme Lord descends as an incarnation. Lord Krishna appeared in the Yadu dynasty, and Lord Ramachandra appeared in the Ikshvaku or Raghu dynasty. Similarly, Lord Rshabhadeva appeared in the dynasty of King Priyavrata. All these dynasties are very famous, and of them the dynasty of Priyavrata is most famous. Oh, what shall I say of the dynasty of Priyavrata, which is pure and very much celebrated. In that dynasty, the Supreme Person, the original personality of Godhead, descended as an incarnation and executed religious principles that could free one from the results of fruitive activity. Mukam karoti vachalam pandum langati grima kripatamaha vandishi gurum yantam. Om namo bhagavate narasimhaya namaste jastejasavira vibhava vachanaka vachadam stra karmashin randa tamo grasa grasa om svaha bhayam bhayam vishtam kshram magishi yasya
Prabhu, I think I made a mistake, and
yeah.
the verse is 15, not 14.
Okay. We're gonna read verse 15 now.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, verse 15. Kon vasya kashtam aparonugachen manoratenapi abhavasya yogi yogamaya spriyayati udasta hiyasataya yena krita prayatna. Who is that mystic yogi who can follow the examples of Lord Rshabhadeva even with his mind? Lord Rshabhadeva rejected all kinds of yogic perfection which other yogis hanker to attain. Who is that yogi who can compare to Lord Rshabhadeva? Purport. Generally, yogis desire the yogic perfections of anima, lagima, mahima, prakamya, prapti, ishitva, vashitva, and kamavasayita. Lord Rshabhadeva, however, never aspired to all these material things. Such siddhis, perfections, are presented by the illusory energy of the Lord. The real purpose of the yoga system is to achieve the favor and shelter of the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But this purpose is covered by the illusory energy of Yoga Maya. So-called yogis are therefore alert by the superficial material perfections of anima, lagima, prapti, and so forth. Consequently, ordinary yogis cannot compare to Lord Rshabhadeva, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So therefore, Lord Rshabhadeva, Krishna, is known as Yogeshwara. He cannot allure. They have the saying, you cannot allure the person who makes sweets with sweets because he's making them. There is this very nice story with Narayana Rishi when Indra decided to send this Apsaras and the Kamadev and the spring season in order to assure that Narayana Rishi would not take over his post. Indra is often, he's worried when some sages perform tapasya. And because he thinks, Atmavam Manyate Jagat, he thinks everybody is after what I am after. Everybody wants sense gratification, just like I want sense gratification. So he sent this Apsaras, and then Narayana Rishi, actually, Narayana, who is Krishna, he produced out of his body so many beautiful girls who are much more attractive than the heavenly Apsaras, and so much so that they became ashamed. And so in the same way, here we see Lord Rshabhadeva, he's not attached to mystic powers. One of the reasons for this is that Krishna is, he doesn't have a problem with that, with the fact that he's God, the supreme enjoyer, the supreme controller. But he's quite okay with that. But his main pleasure in life doesn't come from the fact that he's the controller, the big boss, but from reciprocation with his devotees, with loving exchanges between him and his devotees. And in order for this to happen, he he should allow his internal potency, Yogamaya, to take charge of his pastimes. And he in a sense that he doesn't put himself in this position as the Supreme Lord. Rather, he wants to be like an ordinary person, so that the flow of affection between him and his devotees is not obstructed by this own reverence. So this in the previous verses in this chapter, one of the previous verses, there is the question why the Lord doesn't use these mystic powers, because let alone the Lord, but the great devotees, they also, just like the Lord, they are not attracted to material things. So using the principle of Yukta Vairagya, we can employ everything in Krishna service. But then Shukadeva Goswami replied that this question has been answered by all great authorities. And the answer is that a yogi doesn't trust his mind. Just like when a hunter captures some animals, he keeps them very tight because he knows that they will escape at the smallest opportunity. And then in the same way, the yogi doesn't put his faith in his mind. He's always vigilant because he knows that the mind is not to be trusted. So therefore, we don't employ mystic powers. Of course, first of all, we don't usually have them, but even if you have them, the rule is that we don't use them because it is very intoxicating feeling when you can manipulate the material energy in a miraculous ways. And precisely because of this desire to control and to enjoy, this is the reason why we ended up here in the material world. So we don't need to reenact again this situation and to give opportunity to the mind to Bhagavatam explains the mind can kill the yogi. He will undoubtedly kill the yogi if the yogi doesn't control the mind very carefully. So this it's interesting. We always have a mind, and spiritual or material, and we can divorce our husband or our wife. It's not advisable. We don't advocate this, but it is possible. We could leave our parents. We can leave home and not contact them again. We could resign from our job and not see our boss again, or we can could decide I don't like these friends anymore, but we cannot separate from the mind. The mind will remain with us. It is there is no divorce with the mind, and therefore we better try to understand the mind and train him up, because if we don't train him up, he's by nature, well, the nature of the mind is sattva guna, but because of the material contamination, oh, the mind has been since time immemorial under the influence of the lower modes, and if we don't train the mind, then he will remain our enemy. It will be just like living with a crazy roommate who all the time speaks nonsense, and then gradually we become influenced by these crazy ideas. So we should not just ignore the mind, although this is a good policy in a sense, but in general, we should not ignore the mind. We should understand that the mind is something very real. And we got this material mind because we decided to misuse our free will. As Srila Prabhupada explains, we developed this desire that we want to have our own domain where we want to be in the center. And our original pure spiritual mind became substituted by this material mind. So what's the difference? The spiritual mind naturally flows toward Krishna, and the material mind, the material consciousness, flows toward matter. In other words, we wanted to become God, but this is not possible. There's only one God. And the best option is, instead of becoming real God, is to try to become imitation God. So this is the best. And reluctantly, Krishna gave us this opportunity. And then we needed a place, and also we needed new identity. When you don't accept your real identity, then you need a new false identity. And this is, we all know, this is the false ego, ahankara, the buddhi, intelligence, and the mind. And sometimes they are separated in this way, but sometimes also the mind is explained as the synonym of overarching principle of the whole subtle body, because it is the main element. Srila Prabhupada says the mind is the main element of the subtle body. So also Srila Prabhupada in Bhagavad Gita explains that regarding our eternal enemy, lust, Srila Prabhupada says that the lust has taken strategic positions in our gross and subtle body, in the senses, in the mind, and in the intelligence. So there he says that through the mind, actually, from the mind, the enemy spreads its influence in the intelligence and in the senses. So then our pure consciousness, spiritual consciousness, gradually changed from spiritual to material and becomes contaminated. And then we became conditioned. And what is the meaning of this conditioned nature, conditioned soul? To be conditioned means to mentally associate the fulfillment of desire with stimulus that can actually satisfy that desire. So we're thinking that by connecting the senses with the sense objects, and by experiencing this jada rasa, this death taste coming from material sense objects, experiencing and trying to relish it in the mind, we think that this will bring us happiness, but it cannot. The reality is the opposite. There is one Russian scholar, Pavlov, maybe you have heard of him. back in 1904, he received Nobel Prize for interesting experiment he conducted in his laboratory. He had dogs there, and then the dogs were fed at a certain time. But then he started to, instead of bringing them food, well, first he was bringing them the real food, and then he would turn lights on and ring some bell, and this was associated in the consciousness of the dogs with the food. And then after certain period, then he didn't have to bring food anymore in order to make the dogs to salivate, to have saliva. So he had to just ring the bell and turn on the lights, and then the dogs will think that there is the food. The food is coming. There was no food though. So this is what Maya does to us. Maya rings the bell and turns on the lights, but there is no real satisfaction. But we are convinced that we will be satisfied. So in this way, we become conditioned. And once we condition, we need new identity, new mind, new material mind, material instruments, like the senses and the body. Through these instruments, we access this material reality, which is actually much like virtual reality. Another way to explain our conditioning and the change of our consciousness from spiritual to material is going to the movies. What happens when we go there? First thing that happens, they turn the lights off. So you're not aware anymore about your environment. And then they put this moving pictures, lights, and then our consciousness becomes drawn to the screen. And then we forget about ourselves. We become, we identify with the hero, and we feel different emotions, which have nothing to do with us, with our real situation. And what happens when in the middle of the movie somebody turns the lights on? Then everybody protests. Turn the lights off. We don't want to wake up for the reality. We want to stay in Maya. So this is another analogy, another example, what happens to us in the material conditioning. Another one is when we're dreaming. In a dream, dreams appear real to us. Usually, sometimes we are aware that we're in a dream, but normally, while in a dream, we're convinced that this is the reality. Only after we wake up, we realize that there was something peculiar, something weird about this dream. So the fact that we perceive this material reality as real doesn't prove that it is real. It is real because it comes from the Lord, but it's temporary, and in this sense, it is false. It's not our real home. Another example is intoxication and consequent addiction. So when we, first, intoxication means, we forget ourselves. We forget that we are the soul. And when we repeatedly perform this, when we repeatedly put ourselves into this state, then we develop addiction. So by this repeated intoxication, we are caught in a ever-closing spiral that goes down. And in the beginning, it is wide enough that there is a space for normal human life, like job, family, friends, etc. But it gradually tightens up, and then it squeezes out everything that is not related to the satisfaction of this only one need, which is actually not, it is not real need at all. But then the soul is forced to be attached to something that incites uncontrollable desires and cannot actually deliver relief from those desires. And here we are reminded about the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna explains that this is the nature of lust, the eternal enemy. Jnani no nitya vairina. Jnani is the soul, and nitya vairina is the eternal enemy. Kama rupena kaunteya dushpurena nalenacha. It burns like fire and it's never satiated. So addiction means that we try to consume something that actually consumes us. Srila Prabhupada gives the example of the insects. They're very attracted to the fire, so much so that they enter the fire and then this is their end. So the material mind is simply the condition of material attraction. Just like the spiritual mind is attracted to Krishna, the mind, for example, the mind of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, always spontaneously attracted to Krishna, always seeing everything, perceiving everything in relation to Krishna. And our mind is spontaneously attracted to matter. So this condition of material attraction is the material mind. It is the vehicle by which the soul obtains something false and yet accepts it, just like in a dream or a movie or virtual reality. In other words, the material mind is the agent by which we are harming ourselves repeatedly. We know that there are two main functions of, or not functions, but potencies of Maya. The first one is that it diverts the soul from the real satisfaction. Then the second, it trains the soul to passively accept the false satisfaction again and again, even in the body of a hawk. So from time to time, we are in material consciousness, we are dissatisfied and we think, oh, there must be something wrong here in this material world. And then Maya makes sure that this is very short moment. And then she gives us something to divert our attention from our real interest. Of course, Maya, she does this as a service to Krishna, not because she's evil. She wants to make sure that we are sincerely attracted to Krishna. So then what to do with the mind? The mind has to be controlled, but the mind cannot be controlled by force, because the mind is actually controlled by something which is more subtle than the mind itself. It is the desire. So unless we purify our desire, we won't be able to control our mind. The quality of our mind depends on the quality of our desires. Therefore, the process of Krishna consciousness purifies the desire. So that's another interesting thing about the mind, that it is a storage of all desires that we had. All material desires are stored in the mind. And we are aware only of the surface of the mind. That means we don't actually know how many desires we have, because they have been accumulating in the mind since time immemorial. We had so many desires in different forms of life, as an animal, as an insect, as some weird creature crawling at the bottom of the ocean. We had desires, and they're stored in the mind. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada gives the example of a peaceful surface of a lake, and then suddenly something that is rotting at the bottom some bubble appears on the surface, and then there is a bad smell coming from the bottom of the lake. So this is an example of the mind. The mind, we as sadhakas, it's not so difficult actually to control to a certain extent our appearance, the way we like to be known amongst devotees as nice devotees. But in the depth of our mind, there are so many desires. And therefore, sometimes while we chant Hare Krishna, these thoughts come. And we are wondering, why is this thought bothering me again after so long, so many years chanting Hare Krishna? I thought I'm free from this stupid, lusty material desires. Because, this is called actually, Srila Prabhupada is also using this term, the subconscious mind. And sometimes we are given access to this through the dreams. In our dreams, we get access to the subconscious mind, and there we can experience so many things. Srila Prabhupada actually explains in one purport that for the pure devotees, those who actually have the special mercy of Krishna, they can go quickly through their karma in a dream. They have to experience certain things. They don't have to anymore. It happens quickly in a dream, and then they are free. So that's another way. Of course, we are not advised to investigate all of our material desires. It's not healthy for a sadhaka. We try to keep away from all these ideas of sense gratification. We have enough. For us, it's enough to be aware of the primordial material desire, which is that I want to be Krishna. I want to be the controller and the enjoyer. Ishvara ham aham bhogi, Balavan Sidhu ham Balavan Sukhi. This is the 16th chapter of Gita, where the demoniac nature is described, divine and demoniac nature. And this is the mode of the demon. I am the controller, I'm the enjoyer. So this is our basic material desire. So we have to get rid of this desire, and then by the mercy of Krishna, all other material desires will be cancelled. They won't bother us so much. So the best way, of course, the control of the mind has, can say basically two ways we can control the mind, positive and negative way. Therefore, the main rule of bhakti is smartavya satatam vishnur vismartavya najatuchit sarva vidhi nishadasir etayo eva kinkaraha. So, and this is accomplished in a perfect way by chanting Hare Krishna. Because, well, okay, so what is the positive and negative? Negative means we have to close the access of all these negative, low, animalistic influences. We should not allow all this negative information to enter our mind. This is one way. And the positive is that we should flood the mind with Krishna conscious topics. We should concentrate the mind on the lotus feet of Krishna by reading Bhagavatam, associating with devotees, doing devotional service, making kirtan as much as possible. Srila Prabhupada says that the main principle is that the mind should be bridled and concentrated on the lotus feet of Krishna. So these are the two aspects. Bridled means the negative. It should be controlled. It shouldn't be allowed to go into lower modes. And concentrated on the lotus feet of Krishna is the positive aspect. So by chanting Hare Krishna, we perform both processes in a perfect way. Because when we are chanting, we just try to concentrate and we don't allow any other thoughts to appear in the mind. And by concentrating on the holy name, then we are actually in contact with Krishna. And this is the positive aspect, because we are surcharged with spiritual energy. And this makes our spiritual identity stronger and our material false identity weaker, because we don't feed our material false identity. And when we don't feed it, when we don't give it water, then it gradually weakens, and hopefully one day it will die. This is what's Kadam Kalmagrad once he said in one lecture of Vyasa Puja. He said, I don't know what is my, I have no idea what is my spiritual identity in the spiritual world, but I can tell you one thing, I can promise you one thing, my lower material nature, I'm not going to feed it. I will let it starve and die. So this should be our determination. Also, of course, this determination should be fostered and reinforced by developing higher spiritual taste. And this is actually the only way to control the mind, by strong spiritual culture. Another ways to control the mind is, Srila Prabhupada says, by ignoring the mind. When the mind presents these ideas about sense gratification, we just ignore the mind. Because the mind, it's like a child, very soon, in about 5-6 minutes, it will have something else. The mind is very expert in presenting a very emergent the situation that is it's emergent situation. It has to happen right now. No, yesterday actually. I want to have this, otherwise I will die. Everybody will die. This is so important. But if we tolerate, then in a few minutes, the mind will forget about this and will think about something else. Another way is to impose the intelligence on the mind, to control the mind through intelligence. For example, we wake up in the morning, and through our spiritual intelligence, we can give certain options to the mind. So today I will do this, this, this. You can decide between this, let's say 3 or 5 opportunities, but they are all okay. They are all Krishna conscious. So this is the role of the intelligence. And then the mind can go in the field created by the intelligence and then can choose. But whatever the mind chooses, it will be still Krishna conscious. Or at least, if not directly Krishna conscious, at least as much as possible in a mode of goodness. Because the mind needs some recreation also. This is this famous verse from 11th canto. Eshavai paramao yogo, manasa sangrata smitaha, shriya gyatvanan vicha, damyase bharvato muhun. We control the mind gradually. First, by allowing the mind to move and observing the mind. Then, when we understand the mind's desires, to some extent, of course, not fully, that's not possible. And when we study the mind, then gradually we tighten the reins, and then we bring the mind under full control. So this is, again, the chanting of Hare Krishna is the best process, because for one of the reasons, because while we're chanting, we actually established in our real position as Krishna's servants. And then once we are fixed in this position, then we can actually perceive the mind, because the material mind doesn't want to be in this position. So the mind will start moving. It will fluctuate because it is chanchala. The mind doesn't like to accept any authority, spiritual or material, anything. It's just the advocate of the senses. So while trying to chant with the focus, then we can actually perceive the mind, and then we can start to separate ourselves from the mind. And this is the prerequisite for controlling the mind, because if we're not discriminating between the soul, but between the self and the mind. We cannot control the mind, because the mind will convince us that all of his crazy desires are ours, but actually it's not true. So we should always try to investigate the difference between the soul and the mind. Okay, I'll stop here. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. If you have questions or comments, dear devotees. You have? Okay. Hare Krishna. Okay, then. If not, Granth Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Shri Prabhupada ki jai, Jai Nitai Gaur Premanande, Hari Hari Bol. All glories to the Sema devotees, all glories to Shri Prabhupada.